Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Asian Development Bank's panel discussion about COVID-19. We've just heard from a wealth of medical experts on what it's going to take, and government leaders as well, on what it's going to take to get everyone vaccinated and get us up to herd immunity in Southeast Asia. Now we want to talk about how we are going to recover economically and what that recovery is going to look like. How are we going to make it happen? We know that vulnerable groups like women, younger workers, they've been hit hard by the pandemic, and 1.6 billion kids around the world, they've been affected by school closures. And you know what that means? Essentially, they're behind, they're demoralized. Some of them may not even want to return to school. And global poverty, one statistics that really stood out for me was that global poverty increased in 2020 during the pandemic for the first time in 2 decades. This pandemic has really set us back across the planet. And in Southeast Asia, we're going to be focusing on recovery and how we can get back on track, but most importantly, how that response can be human-centered to make sure that the most vulnerable among us are not left behind. So let me introduce you to our panelists right now. We've got Dr. Robert Guile. Robert is the Chief Sector Officer for Sustainable Development and at the Climate Change Department for the ADB. Good to see you there, Dr. Robert. Thanks for joining us today. We have Ketsuda Supradit. Ketsuda is the International Economic Advisor for the Fiscal Policy Office for the Ministry of Finance in Thailand. So a lot of discussions there about how to spur economic recovery in that country. Magnus Ekbom, a lot of you will recognize this gentleman. He is the co-founder and the Chief Strategy Officer of Lazada Group, and he's also the acting CEO for Lazada in Malaysia. Thanks for joining us today, Magnus. It's good to have you join our panel discussion. And Yanti Sauripjo is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Save the Children US. And if she's a familiar face to you, it's because she also spent 8 years as the Deputy CEO of Save the Children International. So she's appeared on the airwaves here in Southeast Asia quite a bit over the past decade or so. So when we get started, we're going to get started with the questions right now, but we want to send a reminder out to our viewers, for those of you who are viewing us online at home, that you can send questions for our panelists, and I'd be happy to get them to each of the people indicated. All you have to do is click on the questions app in the upper right-hand corner, the icon, not the app, excuse me, and a chat box will appear, and simply type your question in there and it'll pop up next to me here on my desk, and I'll try to get those questions out to our panelists as they come in. So let's get started. The first question for all of you, and I'd like each of you to take a stab at this, is what will the overall recovery look like here in Southeast Asia? We've got vaccines going into arms now in most countries. And Asia, it is expected to recover faster than developed nations when you do a one-on-one apples for apples GDP comparison. What's it going to be like, do you think? Is it going to be a gradual recovery for Southeast Asia? Is it going to be V-shaped? Is it going to be difficult? Dr. Robert, we'll get you to start with this. What are you seeing out there? What are you expecting?
Well, hello, Lisa, and good day to everybody else. Thank you for this opportunity. You know, it's no exaggeration to say that the pandemic has changed everything. Here in Asia and the Pacific, you know, economies have contracted, education has been upended, public transport and utilities are struggling to operate, and of course, health systems are under tremendous pressure. We've seen a negative 0.7% drop in overall GDP in Asia. This is the first contraction in 6 decades, and it's affecting livelihoods everywhere. And while we don't expect developing Asia and the Pacific to rebound strongly, it will hit perhaps 6.8% next year. It will take some time for countries to recover their pre-pandemic economies. And on the social front, we estimate that an additional 80 to 160 million people in the region will be pushed back into poverty, reversing much of the gains that were achieved in recent years. So at the ADB, we've been involved in supporting developing countries respond to all of this and more, and I'll be happy to go into a few details later, but let me just say this. We should not be thinking about returning to normal, but rather to a new normal. Developing Asia and the Pacific is unlikely to be fully vaccinated within 2021. And in fact, COVID-19 could become endemic like the seasonal flu. So caution and preparedness for disruption will be with us for a while. On the positive side, we've seen that workplaces operate with good health practices and flexible working arrangements. And I hope we see schools reopen fully soon. But I do expect that education will also need to operate in a mode of blended physical and virtual presence. In both of these cases, I think there are positive aspects to leverage, and I look forward to the discussion about giving us ideas what to anticipate. I'm confident that the region will rise to the challenge. Back to you, Lisa.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Well, let's get to Kun Ketsuda now in Thailand, and tell us what you're seeing on the ground there, and what you're expecting or hoping the recovery is going to look like.
Let me share in the case of Thailand. We have done so many things the first case happened in Thailand in January last year, and actually this is quite difficult for the policymaker in Thailand, around the world, and in Thailand. I would say the government have to find balance between stimulating economy in the short term and while laying the ground in the long-term recovery, and giving the priority to the people health. And a lot of stimulus and relief package has been implemented in the case of Thailand. We have a special loan borrowing 1 trillion baht. Used for 3 programs. One is for public health sector, strengthen regional and central public health sector, extra pay for the volunteer and medical staff, and procurement the medicine and medical supply. And lately we use for buying the vaccine to ensure that the vaccine will be delivered in timely and cover for all people, and already start in the case of Thailand since February. And that was first amount, and the rest of the money we use for stimulate stimulate the economy in the short term and the long term. You may have heard that we have the what they call half and half co-payment program, that the government subsidy the day-to-day life expenses of people, about half and half. Then this would apply to everyone but cap just only one, like $5 a day, for example. And that's just an example. For the tourism, we have the tourism program, Travel Together, that the government subsidy the cost of the hotel rental and the airfare 40%, and lastly it's just around China. It's a cash hand out. This is the second wave. We have done in the first wave, and the second wave we give cash hand out 3,500.
Right. So lots of stimulus to jump in here. Lots of stimulus, policy, fiscal. Lots of initiatives there from the Thai government, and you're hoping this is going to prompt an economic recovery. And we'll go into some of these details.
This is in the short term. I will talk to you later on in the long term, what we are going to do in the long term.
Yes, and looking forward to hearing that. Let's get to Yanti Saripto now. So Yanti, you are coming, you're viewing recovery from the eyes and the perspective of what it's going to mean for all of those kids who've been sitting at home. They haven't been in school. It's been hard on them. We don't hear a whole lot about that aspect of it, but it's been very difficult on that entire segment of the population. What are you hoping for when it comes to recovery? What are you predicting? What do you see?
What do we see? Well, to pick up on what Robert was saying, of course, we're concerned. Save the Children did a big piece of research end of last year where we asked thousands of kids all over the world, in Asia, but also outside, what their experiences were. And they were children mostly from the communities that we work with. And, almost without exception, they told us that it was tough, that online learning was in most cases not available to them because there's no connectivity in the areas mostly where we work, We're going to see the poor families get poorer. We're going to see girls married off at a young age because the family can't afford her to keep her in school. We're going to see kids put to work again because of economic pressure on the family. And then, of course, the gap of education stopping for so many days. We also know from other epidemics, particularly when we looked at the Ebola crisis in West Africa a couple of years ago, when kids were out of school for 10 or so months, the poorer children, girls in particular, were more at risk of never going back at all. And the kids who were already in disadvantaged circumstances also don't have any lower possibility of catching up academically, but also socially. So there's a real concern for us there. We will see most of the Sustainable Development Goals progress over the last decades that we've seen being rolled back, and that particularly concerns us for kids. So that's certainly the bad news. What we'll also see is that even in the short term, equitable access to vaccines is key, and we're not seeing enough of that. And that's certainly something we've been calling for with lots of other organizations. But that has been really difficult to see, and that concerns us, because that means again that quite often in countries the most marginalized communities will stay left behind. So that worries us. On the positive side, I do also agree with Robert that we have seen a different way of working. We've seen more flexibility, which is great for talent, for people worldwide. We will see more thoughtful ways of using our resources in the future. I'm really hopeful that we won't go back to insane amounts of traveling for certain things that we now know that we don't have to do. And I think socially, the visibility of all these inequalities and the impact it has had has also been good. It is now very clear for everybody to see that those cracks were there before COVID, and that they're having a really negative impact on our economic recovery as well as on the health recovery. So I hope that visibility stays and that it doesn't get forgotten again when the crisis goes away.
Okay, thank you for that, Yanti. And as you mentioned, Robert referred to a new normal. And Magnus, I want you to jump in on this, because as the co-founder of an online retailer, Lazada, you certainly saw a new normal during the pandemic, as everybody had to flock to online shopping. Do you think that's going to continue? And what do you think the recovery is going to look like from your perspective?
Thank you, Lisa. I would start by saying that I think that optimism is going to be a key factor for the recovery in any shape or form, or whatever shape or form it comes in. And I would even go as far as saying that optimism is going to be a competitive advantage. We have to believe that the years ahead are going to drive transformative and positive change. And I think it's also important to put things a little bit into context. If we look at Asia, developing Asia, ASEAN in particular, you go back to 98, you have 2008, you have 2020. Our region here is to a large extent molded by transformative crisis. And every time this region has managed to not just bounce back, but really thrive in a remarkable way. And I think that for me is also very important to keep in mind. And when it comes to what happened and what, should we say, the level of change and transformation that we saw in 2020, I don't think that we fully understand it yet. I think it will take a couple of years to really internalize what actually took place in terms of the impact on our society, how it indeed has both positive as well as challenges in the society are amplified in equal regards. And I think that the challenges that we have been talking through from my fellow panelists, they're very real. They're absolutely there. I do think, and I have to believe that technology can be a positive catalyst to drive new ways of living, of working, of educating, shopping indeed being one of them. It sounds a bit, should we say, superficial to some extent to use the term shopping. I think it is to some extent also about access to products for the daily life that all of consumers needs. It's also a matter of SMEs, retailers, just street side vendors finding new ways to reach consumers nearby and far away. And I think that is something where I'm very happy to see that the online platforms have been able to play that role. I think that we need to do more. I think that we have to do more, and I think that the change that we saw on the consumer side, I think, is quite evident to everyone. That we know, and all of us know personally, that we turn to the apps and the e-commerce app to a larger extent. But the more, I would say, transformative change and more lasting change is that how small and medium-sized enterprises starting to use online platforms and online channels to reach consumers. And I think that is something that I believe is very, very positive, also in terms of future-proofing the economy, to future-proof SMEs. And I hope that is something that will continue forward as well.
Your point is very well taken. Shopping does sound a little on the frivolous side. It's you have filled such a vital function during the pandemic, and technology in general has been absolutely crucial. So thank you for that. Sorry, jump in, Yanti.
Maybe what Max said reminded me. Maybe one thing to say to optimism, and also something we've seen. Young people, young leaders in particular, have, I think, taken the real opportunity here because they're, very familiar with technology, new technology. They've really jumped on the opportunity, I think, to use new platforms to continue to advocate, to campaign, to make their voices heard, not just on things like climate change, but on gender equality, on social justice, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States. And I think that kind of energy and activism has got a real jolt, I think, last year, because it became the norm that is how and communication was conducted. And all of a sudden, the younger population has gotten a real sort of competitive advantage there over their elder colleagues. And I think that's fantastic. And Southeast Asia has a very young population. So arguably, I think that puts you in very good stead.
Yeah, we're doing okay, us older folks too. We're all here on a Zoom call and doing a panel on Zoom, which isn't too bad, right? My kids may have had to set up some of the computer aspects for me, but Dr. Robert, I want to jump in here and get you to talk about the ADB blueprint for recovery from COVID-19. You've laid it all out. Just walk us through the vision and tell us what you feel are the most important things that need to be done.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I think it would be maybe a little bit presumptuous of us to claim that we have a blueprint, but I can talk about some of the things that we're doing to help developing countries in the region. Excuse me. Really, since the very early stages of the pandemic, we started providing finance and knowledge to governments and the private sector. As early as April last year, we put together $20 billion in a comprehensive reform package to do three things. First, we helped governments purchase emergency health supplies and equipment. Second, we provided quick dispersing financing to help strain government budgets, provide services and stimulus with a particular focus on supporting poor and vulnerable groups. And third, we supported the private sector with much needed liquidity and working capital, as well as short-term financing for trade and supply chains to keep economies moving. We're now seeing encouraging signs that vaccine rollout may turn the tide of the pandemic. And so we've now launched a new $9 billion vaccine initiative, working closely with international partners to develop safe and effective vaccines fairly and equitably, as Yanti emphasized, and we fully agree with that. And finally, our financing is supplemented by research and guidance notes on how to respond, recover, and rejuvenate in sectors as diverse as education, transport, water supply, urban development, finance, and many more. And these are guiding the next generation of projects that we will support. So we know that developing countries want to take the opportunity to build back better, and we'll help them to do just that. If I have time, I can mention just a few things.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for that. We want to help with a green and inclusive recovery, and we believe that the pandemic presents an opportunity to build back with more resilient, sustainable infrastructure and has opened up new ways of doing business. So let me just highlight some of our initiatives. First is building sustainable urban development and transport models with greater investment in safe, affordable, and low carbon transportation. Establishing circular economy models that convert byproducts and waste into valuable end products. Accelerating the move to clean and renewable energy to mitigate climate change and provide next generation jobs. Transforming agriculture to improve yields and recovering healthy and sustainable oceans. I've got lots of ideas about how we can get some of these things done, how we can create jobs, but I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
All right, well, let's delve into that once we speak to our other panelists a little bit. I'd like to pop over to Thailand and talk to Kun Ketsuda. Earlier, you were mentioning all of the different fiscal and policy stimulus packages that you've been unrolling over there in Thailand. When are you hoping to get things back to normal, and what's that going to look like for you? What's your timeline?
That's quite a tough question, actually.
I know.
Yes, because the recovery depends on many things, But actually, the prospect is better at right now with the COVID with the COVID vaccine and the global recovery and the result of our stimulus package that we have been doing for more than 1 year already, and this is back to normal. The situation right now is much better than last year, of course.
No doubt.
Can see that, and with the vaccine, the public confidence have come back. And we have, as you know, that our economy rely very much on tourism sector. And each year we earn a lot of revenue from tourism, but nearly it dropped like more than 70% last year. And this year, as I mentioned, the result of economic recovery to stimulate consumption, domestic consumption, and the government, the public sector investment, especially in quality sector, in quality infrastructure and green investment, BCG model. The government would drive this model as our future economic development. As for the SME, government have inject additional liquidity to SME through our state-owned special financial institution. Many things of loans and credit guarantee, and the tourism sector. I think you might have heard that the government gradually opened the country a bit through the fit and fly certificate that you get from the doctor in your hometown. But when you fly, you have to stay in a quarantine for 2 weeks, and after this, you can travel in the country. This apply to foreign tourists and the business people, and with the vaccine, and we are working on the vaccine certificate. This would help the atmosphere in tourism sector would be better. But in the longer term, I think economic restructure need to be reformed. Especially we rely very much on tourism sector. So we might have to diversify to other trade, export in other services. For example, medical care and wellness, but which we are quite good at this. That I just highlight a few.
Yeah, and just to add to what you're saying, the Bank of Thailand governor recently predicted that Thailand will be back to pre-pandemic levels by the third quarter of 2022, but that depends on tourism. We need to see tourism.
Yes. Actually, Ministry of Finance forecast, but a little bit. I mean, this year we forecast a little bit better than Bank of Thailand. We project that the economy will come back at 2.8%. The Bank of Thailand project at 2%, but we have the same idea that the full recovery will come back on the third quarter next year.
Okay, that's great to hear. We're really hoping that this pans out. Magnus, give us your view now on infrastructure and connectivity, crucial as we move forward into recovery. What needs to be done here in Southeast Asia to even out the access for these on these fronts? What do we need to do?
I think that's a good question, because the infrastructure topics, connectivity very much included. I think it is a pillar for the future economy. And when you look at sort of the also technology paradigm that we right now are in, both on the in terms of energy and power generation on the one hand, and if you look at sort of the dependency that still, should we say, is prevalent on non-renewable sources, I think that's one area, of course. The second thing, when you look at sort of advent of I mean, 5G may sound like something that is that really the top priority in a developing part of the world? I think it can be. I think that Southeast Asia has a unique opportunity to really push forward with the build out of the not just the up to current standard level of technology, but really build the technology for the future. It's going to require investment. It will probably cost 10 to 15 billion to build out 5G across the region on a nationwide basis. But I really think that is probably one of the best investments that can be made. I think there are also encouraging signs when you look at just how fast access to not just sort of binary access to internet, yes or no, as was mentioned here before. When you talk about online education, you can't just have connection. You need to have a high quality connection. And I think that there are encouraging signs on the adoption that we are reaching across ASEAN, especially ASEAN 6, I think is a little bit ahead of the curve there, but more to do. But I think that when you look at the ambitions that both from the government side that we have seen, as well as from the partners on the telco and infrastructure side, there are very, very encouraging signs on the ambitions and the roadmaps ahead, but fully supportive of that direction.
So much of this is going to come down to technology and big data, isn't it, when we're talking about the recovery? Jonti, we have a question coming in from a viewer for you. Access to smartphones and internet is important nowadays. How do you see maltreatment of children, especially among those who have no access to smartphones and internet due to poor economic conditions in the coming years if online classes continue?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Magnus. I think investment in broadband is one of the best investments governments and to some extent the private sector can make, both in terms of economic returns, but also in terms of social returns. So we are really calling for infrastructure investments, again, equitably, so that not people who are falling off the grid get left behind further. I would also call out that there's a real importance here to get the social aspect also right, making sure that in a community or in a household there's equitable access. Quite often, even if there is some form of access now, but often girls in the family do not have access to the device, or children at large don't have access to a device. So that's an issue. Digital literacy for kids, to encourage that in an education curriculum, is something where governments can be helpful, and that should happen now, and that's not always the case. And online safety, of course, also concerns us. Save the children, as you can imagine. We're actually doing some innovative work there with a couple of private sector partners to really think about AI and to use that as to use sort of predictive tool sets or even chatbots to make sure to actually be helpful for parents or educators to make sure that online tools are can be used safely, but for kids, because of course, again, that would open up a whole new realm of risk.
You said governments can be helpful with uneven access. How? What can they do?
Really good targeting. Really look at the population and really ask ourselves, where are the people who would normally not have access to basic services? And is it because sometimes it's about last mile? Is it because they're very remote? Is it because it's very hard to get to? Is it for other discriminatory reasons that they're left behind or marginalized for whatever reason? And I think because we know that when you do that kind of analysis, if you get it right for those people, you get it better for everybody.
Kun Ketsuda, I know that you focus on finance and you're an advisor to the Ministry of Finance. So this is probably outside of your wheelhouse, but is what Yanti's been talking about something that is on the radar of the Thai government?
I think we're looking for the longer term of the economic growth in the future. After the remedy, the relief package have been done for a lot. So we're looking for increased digitalization in our economy. As everyone knows, that's very important. And during the lockdown, the digitalization helped us a lot, both in terms of the government, government to inject money through the national e-payment, and also the big data, as we say, that we have to cross-check which one is the group of people who are real in needed. For example, the low-income people, the vulnerable, which one, for example, farmer, we have to cross-check the data with the Ministry of Agriculture if they are the farmer, or we check with the Ministry of Interior if they are under the Social Security system, or because there are many agencies involved. So we have to check these people already received the assistance yet or not yet. So we know right away that who are in need. For example, this is very important of digitalization. So we need to enhance digital literacy, I would say. This is very important. SME as well on the e-commerce, and from the policy from the Ministry of Finance, e-tax, for example, it have to be done through electronically. That would help increase competitiveness of the country. And also I would say, if you have time a little bit, we have to work out the income distribution, to eliminate income distribution throughout the country, though, in the rural area and in the capital, in the urban area. So we have to work on that. And I would say that digitalization is the tool. And also the tax reform, I think we need it, because everyone knows that COVID have brought out about a big amount of budget to remedy and help the people. So we are in the case of Thailand, we are with the assistance of the ADB, we are working on tax reform, how to secure a sustainable source of our government revenue, for example, and then investment.
Okay, Kun Ketsuda, thank you. Excellent points, and you're cutting across several different areas of the population. And Yanti, it's important. It's not just targeting the kids; it's targeting families as well. And this is something that we need to focus on. Not just the kids, not just giving them devices. It's the families and income distribution as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're advocating. We're part of our remedial programming and advocacy is not just about how do we help kids catch up classes, etc., with a combination of low tech and tech, but it's also about cash transfer programs for families who need it the most, because that will allow them to have their kids go back to school.
Absolutely. Magnus, female-led small businesses, they've been hit really hard in this pandemic. And what can be done? I mean, as someone in tech, what's your advice to help out here?
I think that, first of all, it's very true that female-led businesses and females in the workforce as a whole has been hit disproportionately for a number of different reasons, both because of structural reasons and sort of when you look at the service sector and tourism, as we have talked about previously. And what I would say is that I do believe, and I think we spend a lot of time on this topic at Lazada, that female entrepreneurs using technology is a bright spot of last year, because there is the playing field is fairly leveled in terms of that female entrepreneurs can start a business in their home. They don't need to sort of be even out of the domestic premises to start to build a business. And I think that is one of these very, very positive positive signs, right? I think that there is no sort of magical formula how to take this forward. I think it's really the combination of all of it, because we also know that the female business owners who run shops on Lazada, they also carry a disproportional responsibility for home-based education and so on, right? So it's really the whole system that we need to look at holistically, how to empower female entrepreneurs to have the time and sort of have a right to the time to work as well, right? And I think that is something that cuts across multiple sectors and parts of the overall community and society as a whole. And I think that is again why this is, I mean, the term collaboration keeps coming up, and I really do emphasize this, right? That when we look at also some of the topics that Ketsuda was bringing up in terms of how do we get stimulus into the economy, that it starts with the good intention that there is a realization of the need, both in terms of direct cash in hand stimulus for daily consumption, all the way to working capital financing for small and medium-sized businesses. Then the question arises, how do we find these businesses? I think Thailand is a great example where the digitalization of information of SMEs is quite far ahead. But when you look at the availability of proper structured data sets of who the SMEs are, which sectors they are in, contact details, bank accounts, I think there are many things that can be further amplified here. And this touches upon governments, of course, as well as the banking sector, technology companies, and multiple other stakeholders. And I think that is something that we have seen many very constructive and positive examples of collaborative progress over the past 12 months. And I think this is something that we sincerely hope continues also in the next phase of the recovery.
Yes, we're hoping so too. You mentioned collaboration. Has collaboration between government and companies like yours increased since the beginning of the pandemic?
I think without a doubt. I mean, if you look at the first phone calls that were placed as the pandemic unraveled, just almost the day a year ago, was to our government counterparts to ensure that we have open channels. And I would say that I really want to commend leaders across all the markets that we are in here in Southeast Asia for responsiveness, reactiveness, and really trying to be as pragmatic as we possibly can. Over the past 12 months, I think the lines between the private sector and the public sector has really been blurred in a positive way, in the sense that we realize that we have to work together to find ways out of the crisis. We can't run our business without we also take as a private corporation many structural infrastructure in the society for granted. We run on the rails of the countries in which we operate, right? And I think that is a very evident reminder of how important it is to continue to have a constructive discussion. This is not about lobbying for or against policy. There needs to be policy reform. There needs to be, a constructive dialogue on many of the complicated topics that we are faced with, because this is not a matter of easy answers. When we talk about also the topics that Shanti mentioned on platform safety, on user safety, how do we safeguard children, children in the online context? I think that this is a vast topic that needs more debate, not less debate. This is not about the private sector sort of just doing what we think is right. There needs to be multiple governmental, NGO, as well as private corporation dialogue in this regard, right? And I think that this is something that I keep emphasizing, that there has been a bit of, traditionally, I would say, whenever there is an idea for a new policy or for a new policy initiative, private sector should kind of per default respond no, which I think is a really kind of old school way of looking at this dialogue of policymaking. I think that we have, in, I would say, almost every regard, high quality policymakers across ASEAN 16 where we operate. I think that these are thoughtful people trying to solve very complex problems with multiple variables at a very high, I would even say breakneck speed to some extent, right? And I think that is something we try to be a constructive partner in, and I really am glad to see that partnership has strengthened over the past 12 months.
That's wonderful to hear. So this could be another aspect of the new normal that Robert was talking about earlier. Interesting. Robert, what's your view on how we get people back to work?
Well, that's really a key question. Let me put it this way: the recovery process that governments are engaged in now and the private sector are engaged in now can be a tremendous opportunity Number one, you have these massive stimulus packages that many governments are rolling out. Number two, businesses are retooling and revising their business models. And a lot of countries, even though they needed to substantially increase investments in infrastructure even before the pandemic, now they need to build back better. And so we think that they can expand employment and re-employment opportunities in three ways. First of all, skills development can be linked to this big buildup in infrastructure through partnerships with technical and vocational training institutions, sort of joint education and apprenticeship programs. We have one such program called Build for Skills that we're rolling out in Mongolia and Pakistan and working with 2 other countries to start. And we know that on-the-job training in combination with classroom learning is a great way to introduce higher order skills that are vital to sustainable development. Second, we need to help people prepare for the future of work as economies evolve. So we've just completed a study on skills development in high growth industries, sometimes called Industry 4.0. We estimated job displacements and gains in these new industries and sectors as they outgrow old ones. And we found that job losses in the traditional economy could well be offset by new jobs of the future. However, 21st century skills development and digital fitness are really crucial to realize those benefits. As everybody around the world knows by now, we're in the midst of a massive unplanned exercise of retooling education and using technology to reach everybody, and we're learning as we go. So we need to continue to focus technology where it can be most effective and equitable, and also support lifelong learning as industries and careers evolve. Yeah. And I want to return just briefly to the point about how the pandemic has worsened systemic gender inequalities. And we're really focused on women's needs as part of the response and recovery efforts. And some of the ways we can do this is promoting proactive policies to redistribute women's care responsibilities to increase their labor force participation. New models of public and private, high quality, affordable care for children, elderly, and disabled. We need to improve the employment conditions of female dominated occupations, such as in informal services. And we can support women's entrepreneurship through skills training and access to financial services, another really important point that Magnus mentioned. So we're working with governments across the region on all of these fronts, and we're looking forward to contributing to the full economic and social recovery. Thank you.
Okay, well, Robert, thanks for that. I want to pick up on what you said about targeted technology. And we actually have a viewer question here, which I think gets right to the heart of one of the most important issues going forward. It's the vaccine pass or vaccine passports. How might they work during a post-COVID-19 recovery? Who wants to take that? Magnus, you're the tech guy. I'm going to throw it to you.
I was afraid you're going to say that. No, I think that first of all, I think this is a vexed issue. It's not, I think, just as simple as taking out. I mean, I think that first of all, the technology to put this into place is available. I don't think that is even about necessarily very advanced technology. There are different near field solutions that can be inserted physically into an existing passport in a non-fungible way that can make that practically available. I think that there needs to be holistic considerations, given that there is a lot of ambition to get this underway as soon as possible. I think we were talking about tourism and the role that tourism plays in the world economy, especially in developing nations. And I think that this is something that should be prioritized. So I would say technology is available. Rush thoughtfully into the implementation. That's just what I would say.
Why hasn't it been done at this point? We've had a year to prepare for this.
Well, I think that, we are right now, even if you look globally, we are at a state where there is much more technology available than is necessarily being put to use. So it's not that the technology isn't there. I think that we need to look at the whole sort of applicable context that when you move across, I mean, passports is one of these truly global use cases, right, of a consumer product, so to say. And when you look at the standards, and this is also something that has to do with sovereignty and whatever else, where I mean, multilateral implementation of a policy is a complex matter. And so I don't think that this is necessarily a technology question as much as it probably needs to be driven by necessity. And I think that now necessity and urgency in this regard is higher than ever. So I think that technology can be a constructive catalyst for that change.
All right, and Kun Ketsuda, I'll get you to weigh in here as well, since tourism in Thailand, it's going to be a big issue for you. You need this.
As far as at the moment, I think, and would, changing the leading in industry in Thailand, not just only in Thailand and in other countries as well, it's not easy. So many hotels already established, and there's so many tour operators. This would be there, and the government still support tourism sector. I think for the next few years, and because as I mentioned, it's not easy to change to adjust the infrastructure or the hotel or something like that. But I think we would focus on, we would use we would try to get the quality tourists to enjoy our wellness and medical care. That would help the country in the long term. It's not just anyone who come to the country. I think we would be quite selective if possible.
All right. Well, we are almost out of time, but before we go, I'd like for each of you to weigh in, just a quick answer on what's your most important piece of advice going forward in the recovery? What do you think people need to be focusing on? Robert, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a really great question. For me, I hope that we've learned as many of the positive lessons from the past year and don't expect to return to business as usual. Let me just give you an example. In our case at the ADB, we went from working 100% in person to 99% virtual with 48 hours notice. We had no idea what we were jumping into. And yet we gave people flexible working arrangements, the ability to work from anywhere, spend a lot of time in video meetings, and we ceased all travel. And yet we delivered 50% more projects in 2020 than we did in 2019.
That's amazing.
And that was due to remarkable dedication and hard work by everyone. And some of what we're doing now is not sustainable in the long run, but much of it is. And managers and staff in our organization are looking forward to business unusual in the future.
Wonderful. So part of the new normal. Yanti.
Yeah, we have to take confidence out of that proven adaptability that we've seen, to Robert's point, from pivoting almost overnight to completely different modes of working, not just sort of going from your office to your home desk, but also we've been delivering books on camels and donkeys in order to keep education alive for kids, even because we couldn't get them anymore in the classroom, right? And then we put some meals on in there as well, because otherwise kids would go hungry. So that really practical creativity that we've seen, I really hold that dear. And I would say, if people were doubting that we're all an interconnected ecosystem and one global family, I think last year has shown for us that is certainly not, that is what gets us through this. And we've seen great examples, we've seen not so great examples, but I would hope people would take heart from the great examples. Cross-sectoral, global collaboration, public and private sector, that in the end will deliver results. And maybe lastly, I would say a plug for empathy in leadership roles. And I think we've seen that leaders who've espoused that, private sector, public sector, everywhere, tended to have done better coming through it and helping teams through it than if they didn't.
All right, thank you for that. Very nicely put. Kun Ketsuda, your view on your advice going forward as we really get an economic recovery up and running.
I think I would say that Thailand have to, actually, this is the current government policy. We are committing to promote growth, not only just sustainable, but to ensure the inclusive to the people and friendly to the environment. As you know, that we have the EEC, Eastern Economic Corridor, the Special Economic Zone, and we will focus on Thailand 4.0 industry, which is more advanced and high technologies industry, and also the bio-circular green economic model. This would be the target of the agenda of our future economic development. BCG model focused on promoting for industry, namely in that agriculture, food, medical, wellness, bioenergy, biomaterial, biochemical, tourism, and creative economy. I think this would would add the value added to our GDP and create more jobs and restore the income in the future to the country.
All right, wishing you all the best with that. And finally, Magnus, final word to you. What's your advice as we move forward with the recovery?
The first thing I would say is that people are phenomenal, and I think that all of the examples that were just mentioned showcase just that the adaptability of a community, of a society, I think comes down to individual actions on a daily basis, and I think that is for me extremely heartening. What I would say as a hope and a desire, I think, is to remember the fact that, as was also mentioned, right, that the world is a connected place, and if anything that we have seen from this crisis is that fact, right? And there is an increase in, I wouldn't say nationalism necessarily, but in a time of crisis, everyone also needs to look to their own. But I think to also keep in mind that what brought us in terms of the progress that we have made in poverty alleviation, in terms of inclusivity in the economy as a whole, has been collaboration, multilateral trade, and economic cooperation on a multinational basis. And I think that is something that I hope that we, in a thoughtful way, bring back to a way of working throughout and as we go to the next step of the and the next phase of the recovery. I think that is something that is easy to forget, but it's important to remember also what got us as far as we have come today.
All right. Well, thank you to all of you for joining us today. Really appreciate your thoughts and your expertise and your insight. And that's going to wrap up our panel on the recovery from COVID-19 as we move forward this year and hopefully get our economies moving once again. Yanti, I really loved what you said about an interconnected ecosystem and one connected family, and it echoes what so many of you had to say, Magnus, as well. And on that note, as we conclude this panel, I'm going to ask you to stay tuned, all of you, because at the top of the hour, Save the Children International CEO, Inger Ashing, is going to be launching the Global Center of Excellence in Innovation. So please join us for that launch. It's coming up in about 8 minutes from now. And please enjoy the afternoon sessions at the Southeast Asia Development Symposium. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you a little bit later.